So what I've got here are two criminology research articles, and I'm going to talk you through these quickly, and I'm going to talk through them in light of the questions that I've set for assignment 1. So first off, the most important thing to remember is to read the course outline and to read all the course outline. If you look down here towards the bottom, after the text of assignment 3, you'll see that there's a subsection on assignment format, which includes information on sources and reading. This gives you a sense of the standard of evidence required, some information on sourcing, journals, layout and referencing, note on word count, passive or active voice, and some submission. Now the questions for assignment 1 require you to pick one of these listed articles. Again, you have to read the article in order to answer the question. So the first step is to read the article in its entirety. And it's always a good idea to take some notes as you go. That's something I do myself in my own work. Whenever I encounter a new article that I have to read completely through, open up another page or a Word document and just start making notes on each section. Now, the trick is, or the thing to remember is to, you should hopefully quickly get familiar with the structure of research articles, because a lot of them look kind of the same, or they follow the same layout. Here we've got one from the European Journal of Criminology, and we've got an article from the British Journal of Criminology. First part of any research article is the abstract, and the abstract is supposed to give a summary of the general scope and aims of the study, sources of data, if any, if relevant, methods of analysis sometimes, and a short statement about the conclusions of the article. It'll also usually come with some keywords that give you a sense of the key topics that are coming in it. So the article, or the abstract, sorry, at the start is where you want to begin to just get a sense of what's coming in the article. As you look down through it, you'll see that most articles, most research-based articles, again, articles that are based on either original or secondary data analysis, they follow the same structure. There's usually an introduction and there's a literature review. So in this research article, which is titled, Behind Closed Doors, an explanation of cell sharing and its relationship with well-being, they study the literature on cell sharing and well-being. So how are they linked together? How does cell sharing or isolated incarceration, how do they affect prisoners' well-being? And then there's a brief review of the literature covering other factors influencing either one of those relationships. That's something they're trying to control for in the study. And there's some information in the present study. So question 1 asks you, what is the main research problem or question of the study? It doesn't always appear this way, but it's more common in survey-based articles that they'll set out a research question or a hypothesis. But you can infer this anyway from the abstract. If you're looking at the abstract, you'll see here that they say that little is known about how cell sharing may influence well-being. So the study explores this through a sample of 569 imprisoned men. So the research question is about exploring the relationship between cell sharing and well-being. So that's question 1 here. What is the main research problem or question of the study? What about the second paper? Again, we can kind of infer the research question by looking at the title and the abstract. So this is about narratives that invoke religious concepts. So jihad, sharia, caliphate, and so on. So in this study, they take a narrative criminological approach, which is an approach to analyzing data. It's a narrative analysis. We explore the rejection of religious extremism that emerges in everyday interactions in a religious community under intense pressure in Western societies. So you could summarize that, the research problem or the research question, as an examination of the rejection of religious extremism in religious communities in Western societies. If you read further down in the introduction, you'll probably see some other, usually in the introduction, they give a summary of the background and what the main sort of focus of the article is as well. And you'll see here in this one, they follow the same structure. We've got a review of literature and narrative criminology and everyday religion, epistemic injustice, counter-narratives, and so on. And eventually we get to the method. So the next part of the assignment asks you what research methods are used: qualitative, quantitative, mixed, or comparative historical. As I said in week 1 and in weeks 2, you can often infer what method of analysis is being used, or the type of method that's being used, based on how they collected the data. You can see here that in this article, they've said that they're using a stratified survey of 569 imprisoned adult men in Northern Ireland. And you'll see later on, if we go down to the method section, that they're using a survey and that they're using, see later on, statistical analysis to look at the relationship between cell sharing and well-being. So they talk about the survey up here in the section just before the sample, And so they talk about the fact that they administer this data collection instrument to prisoners at McGilligan and McGabry and so on. This is a quantitative method using self-administered surveys. In the second one, Sandberg, we can see here, it's in the abstract that they interview qualitative interviews with 90 young Muslims in Norway. But again, if this wasn't stated as explicitly in the abstract, you scroll down to the methods. Generally speaking, this is where you will find further information on the research methods used. So interviews with 90 young Muslim men in Norway, conducted in 20 municipalities, amongst respondents of different backgrounds. So they some Sunnis, some Shias, and others which fall into a different group with sectarian affiliations. So that's the data. So that's the methods of data collection. In the first article, they use quantitative surveys. In the second article, they use qualitative interviewing. But in some, you'll see that they might use a mix of these. They might interview some prisoners and survey them and so on. How were the data sampled? If you look here under the method section for this one, they write that the interviews were recruited using social networks, referral by university students, social media such as Facebook, contacting mosques, Muslim youth organizations, seeking out Muslim events. And generally speaking, what we're looking at here is probably a combination of a snowball sampling method to some extent. Remember, based on what we did in week 3, this is a non-probability sampling method. So these methods are often used in qualitative research with hard-to-reach populations where a list of respondents isn't readily available. So they're being referred on by university students, and then they're finding people through social media channels such as Facebook. So again, it's difficult to characterize these entirely, and the point of the assignment is to just give it a go to apply your interpretation to it based on your understanding of sampling procedures. So what we're kind of looking at here is a snowball sample where they're using onward referral from other university students and social networking. So I would say partly availability sample, they're just, again, recruiting openly through social media, and they're using onward referral from other students. In this one, we see here the sample is a random stratified sample. This falls into the category of probability sampling. So they sample amongst imprisoned adult men, age range 21 to 71, average age 36, mean age 36, median age 33. And they give details of the sample, where they obtained the sampling frame through the NIPS, the Northern Ireland Prison Service. And then they talk here about the response rate and so on. So response rate being the percentage of those who responded to the survey relative to those who were issued a survey. So moving on to the next question then, which is what methods were used to analyze the data. And we see here in this article, they've got a range of different measures in the survey. First of all, they ask things about well-being, coping style, demographic information, and some contextual information about the prison. The procedure, see here they use piloting of the survey and so on. And the analysis, is analysed, survey data are analysed using SPSS, statistical package for the social sciences. And I think if I remember from looking at this, most of this was analysed using contingency table analysis. So they're using this chi-squared analysis. But it's perfectly fine to say that statistical analysis was used, or to just have a look down below here and see that they've used ordinary least squares regression analysis, and that they've used t-tests. So this is really the level we're talking about in this assignment, is that level, identifying the method of analysis. We don't need to explain what OLS regression is. We don't need to explain what a t-test is. You just need to be able to find these, to locate them within the article and to report them. In Sandberg, you'll see from reading through the article that what they're using is a method called narrative analysis. So you'll see here at the top, they use a narrative criminological approach, which is about using or analysing the stories that these young Muslim people, young Muslim men, I think it's an all-male sample. They use the analysis is conducted on the stories that these young men tell. So this is a narrative analysis. You'll see that term mentioned above in the review of literature. And as we go down through this, you'll see here what they do is they present different aspects of these young people's narratives. So how they talk about concepts such as jihad, holy war, how they talk about things like martyrdom and so on. And they present this using quotations or excerpts from the interviews that they conducted. So again, this is a form of qualitative data analysis. Again, they've used qualitative data collection by administering by conducting interviews. Therefore, the analysis is conducted on qualitative data. As you read down through this again, you'll see a little bit more about the presentation of some quotations and so on. In the Murad paper, You go down through it, you'll see the results of their statistical analysis, and they present their data in tabular form. Now the final question is kind of the more sort of engaged or the more critical aspect of it is, do you find the author's conclusions convincing given their methods of sampling, data collection and analysis? So the trick here is to go back through the paper and to think, well, if we take this article in terms of the sample, are there any things you can think of here that could be done differently or improved upon within the sample? The study is specifically a study of men. Why did they do that? Should they have included perhaps a gender balance? Should they have stratified the sample by age? Again, they examine age as a factor, as a predictor here in the study, but maybe should they have restricted the sample to people under 60? Should they have broadened the sample out to include proportions of males and females? Should they have interviewed perhaps prison officers or prison staff as well to get their perspective on it as an adjunct to the analysis, not necessarily as a component of the sample? With the Sandberg one, you might ask, well, given that a lot of these referral methods, given that the sample was based on self-referral, how can we be sure that this is representative? Are we only getting sort of a narrow snapshot based on, a small network? If what the researchers are doing is getting one person to refer them on to someone else, someone they know, then they run the risk of simply interviewing a relatively small enclave of people who all know each other but might be different to the wider group at large. So with snowball sampling, we never really know how representative it is, and that's kind of an inherent issue within snowball sampling anyway, because it deals with hard to reach populations. But you might want to ask questions about, well, should they have included different quotas? Why did they only focus on young men? Again, gender is always a dimension that's in question within studies like this. Why did they focus specifically on Norway? Is there something unique about the context of Norway? Or should they have included a comparative dimension? In reality, a lot of this isn't possible. Samples are usually dictated by availability, by funding constraints, the fact that the researchers probably couldn't travel much further than beyond Norway to interview them. But nonetheless, it's worth thinking about this from a scientific point of view. In an ideal world, what sort of adjustments or changes would be made? Given the method of data collection, are there any issues in the data collection? What do we think about the fact that, I'm not sure if they refer to it in the article, but given the potential for perhaps high rates of illiteracy amongst the prisoner population, were there issues with the administration of the instrument? Was the instrument widely understood? Were the questions understood? What about the kinds of question? How do you measure something like well-being? Well-being is a very complex concept. It relates to mental well-being, physical well-being. It's multidimensional. Can we capture this with just a single instrument? Or again, the authors don't use a single question, but you could raise the question as to whether the scales like this capture all the full dimensions of the concept, which we talked about in week 4, this idea of measurement validity. And then finally, their methods of analysis. Again, I'm not asking you to delve deeply into the method of analysis, but generally speaking, based on this, do you find this account convincing? What do the authors conclude about the relevance of religious scripts for the discussion of for the discussion of risk and risk framing? Are you convinced that they have given the data sufficient and detailed treatment? If you feel there are sample limitations, then how can you have confidence in the validity of the findings? How can you be sure that this is representing the full range of possible narratives that exist amongst young Muslim men in Norway? Equally speaking, with the Murad study, you might want to look at things like, well, given issues with the sample, equally it's fine to defend the paper and say that, based on the extent to which the authors disclosed all the steps, that you're perfectly confident in the findings. That's fine, but explain why. The goal here is to use the vocabulary of the course, so to be able to describe or interrogate the article in terms of what you think about the sample quality, the quality of the data collection, and so on. So to get using the terminology and demonstrating your competence with the terminology is the goal of this assignment. So that's a brief run through of 2 articles that again are not on the list, not on the required list for assignment 1, but are just examples of 2 different types of methodology that you might come across when you're completing the first assignment.